This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid-state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many, many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid-state, turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I'm honored to have David Kakish. He is the founder and president of RIA WorkSpace. He helps small and medium businesses to improve their security and compliance, especially in the financial sector. But we're going to be talking a lot about kind of how he got to where he is today, some of that background information, some of his leadership tactics and stuff, as well as IT security, some of the stuff that us technical leaders may need to know more about than what we do know, and some of the things that we're forgetting to focus on. Anyway, with all that being said, David, welcome to the show.
John, great to be on with you.
Hey, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are in your career today and how you started or founded RIA WorkSpace and what the kind of passion behind that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, again, thanks, John. And I want to welcome the listener. Yeah, my name is David Kakish. I am the president and founder of a company, of a brand called RIA WorkSpace. We work with small to midsize financial advisors and registered investment advisors where we become their IT department. So things like IT security, cloud help desk, all kinds of things like that. And as much as I love to talk about that, I also like to talk about entrepreneurship and technology and innovation. So very easy for me to sort of jump back and forth and combine a lot of that because some of the other things might appear a little bit boring. But the funny story is I spent many years of my life working at a corporate 500 company, and I was working a lot with security, so I was a security specialist, and we'd work with very large, what I would say the mid-market, so companies 500 to 1,000 employees. And I distinctly remember I was on this one call, and it was a small business owner, and it had to do with a firewall. And here's what he told me, and this was my inspiration to start my own business and kind of go out on my own. He said, "David, you definitely know a lot of what you're talking about. You know a lot more than my local IT provider. And I get it. And I trust your judgment. However, no disrespect to you, but every time I have a major issue or something happens, he's local, he's here, and he's helping me with that. With you working at a really big company, I don't have that. And so this is not an insult to you." And, it was that, and I can't remember the name of the client or, anything like that, but it was just it was a small, a 2-minute side note that he had with me. And that was my inspiration to go out on my own and start my business. And when we first started the business, we were really going to only focus on cybersecurity for small and mid-sized businesses. But what we quickly found out was, oh my goodness, they want a one-stop shop for IT that includes cybersecurity and not something that's separate. So anyways, that's a little bit of my background and how I got into the space.
Yeah. So when you're getting into that and you get into a small business, I know one of the things that I've done in the past when it came to consulting with small businesses, they want that one-stop shop, but there's a lot of things that are missing, because they'll have hired someone that came in and set up a server, maybe set up some file shares, maybe set up their Office 365 environment, but didn't connect all the pieces. Is that something you guys focus on? And how do you go about figuring out what's missing?
Yeah, actually quite often that's exactly what we do. And that's sort of our sweet spot. So I'll use Microsoft 365 or Office 365 as an example, right? They're a very big player in this space. I can tell you, 80 to 90% of the time, when we first start working with a client, there's a lot of features that, especially security features, that they're not using, that they're already paying for. And the analogy that I jokingly use, it's kind of like it's an airplane. You don't need to change the airplane. You just need a better pilot, or you need a different pilot. And it's almost like they're using this airplane to drive around rather than to fly around, because there's just so many other things that they can do. And,
right.
you know, the big question that I ask, you know, business leaders, IT leaders, you know, what's one thing that keeps you up at night? And, you know, cybersecurity is one of those things that's in the back of their head that keeps them up at night. And so, yeah, we see a lot of features, a lot of things that can be done that are simply not done, because a lot of times people just don't know that, and the IT provider a lot of times doesn't even know that. So yeah, we see that across the board.
So when you're looking at like the features that they aren't using, you talked about the airplane analogy, which I think is a great one. I know when I first dove into Microsoft 365 and saw all the things that are there, and realized that most people were just using, you know, the office functions and, you know, the traditional office functions, let's say Outlook and stuff. They weren't using like some of the tools like Planner and Power Automate and even SharePoint weren't being utilized. But is using some of those features also kind of exposing us to more risk?
Well, that's a great question. So when I talk about, I like to laser focus on security features, right? Like that's the area that I tend to really focus in on and talk about that. So to answer your question, I'm not necessarily saying, hey, there's a lot of other applications that you're not using, because most people know which applications they want. And yes, sometimes, you know, maybe they're not using Planner or they're not using, you know, something else, but there are, some core things. And, you know, I'm happy to talk about them that we see all the time over and over and over again. And some are simple, some are not that complex, but they're either already included in your Microsoft subscription. And again, this could be your Google subscription or, you know, whatever. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Microsoft and laser focus on that. Or maybe you just need to upgrade that subscription and you can substantially do a lot more. So I'll share a couple of things with you really quick. You and I know this, most people know this, but I am amazed at how many people have their Microsoft accounts and they don't have the multi-factor authentication enabled, right? It's the least expensive way to maximize the security of your email, maximize the security of your account. I can't tell you how time and time again, this just should be a core requirement. We all know that, but you know, when you do an audit, you're like, oh my goodness, you know, only half of the company or, you know, 20% of the people don't have that enabled.
Wow.
And that's crazy. Here's another really, really neat one that a lot of people don't know. And it's really fantastic. So the fancy word is data loss prevention, or DLP. But the whole concept there is, if I send an email that has a social security number or a credit card number or an account number in there, right? How can we either prevent that or automatically encrypt it so it goes out in an encrypted format without having any of that information in plain text over email? Again, that is a function of the Microsoft 365. If you get the right subscription, you just need to know how to set up and enable that feature. So those are, I could talk about many other things, but I just wanted to share a couple examples. And it's just, it's mind-boggling sometimes, but that's okay. And if you want to, if you want to know more about this, and we have a checklist, what everything I've talked about, you can go to riaworkspace.com/podcast. We've got a couple of PDFs there. You don't need to even put in your email or anything. You can just download the PDFs and you can give it to your IT person. You can give it to your managed service provider and say, hey, are these things that we have in place? So we created a checklist for the listener to go download that and use that, because, I don't want to bore them to death and go through the entire checklist, but I want them to know that there is a checklist available that they can go and download and they can leverage and use.
Do you think it's advantageous to use some of the add-on features that Microsoft has, like the advanced threat protection and things like that, on top of the Microsoft 365, or is it just some of the standard things like the DLP that comes with all of them that gives you the most benefits?
Yeah. So again, because we work, we like to maximize the security because we work a lot with financial advisors. and registered investment advisors. So usually they're managing a lot of money for their own clients. And so we really like to enable a lot of that for our clients. Like by default, we do that. I mean, they have to request us not to do that. And so that's sort of our default mode. Probably the really big one, and we've all heard it, but we just don't necessarily implement that, is the security awareness training, right? That's really the big one that, we provide our clients with what I would call micro trainings, where it's a short, like a 2 to 5 minute video. But really the whole idea there is that your weakest link, we all know this is our people, and especially as it relates to email and some basic security, and security awareness training really goes a long way. And so that's something that you might think isn't that critical, but that really should just be something that's standard in, every company, every organization that's out there.
Yeah. How do you balance that with or what do you recommend for people for an adequate amount of training? Because I've been to conferences where some companies talk about how they do phishing tests every week. Other people say they do it quarterly. Some people say they just have an annual product. And I've been back and forth in my head, because if you do too much of it, then people are getting resentful. It's interfering with their daily jobs. But if you don't do enough of it, then you're putting yourself at risk. So what do you find that balance?
Yeah, that's it's the classic balance of, how much security and how much productivity do you lose because of that, right? And I'll tell you this: sometimes there's power in simplicity, and that's what not a lot of people sometimes realize.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, each company is a little bit unique, and they can make the decision in terms of how they want to do that. But I would encourage typically, I would say at least twice a year to do something like that would really go a long way, and then include some security awareness training when you onboard new employees, especially, you just want new employees to actually have that. And so I'd say, twice a year seems to be a good tempo. Some companies may want it more or less, but definitely during the onboarding process, when you bring on new hires, you want that to be part of that process. But also, the other analogy that I use is, if you take something like an iPhone, right? It's pretty simple to use, but there's a lot of complexity and sophistication in the background. Mm-hmm. But from a user perspective, it's very simple. And when it comes to security and security awareness training, you can actually set it up that way. It doesn't have to be super complex. You can go ahead and you can set it up that way. So it's simple on the front end, but on the back end, you can have a lot of sophistication. You can have a lot of complexity that's in place, but just keeping it really simple, for the end user, for the employees that are there.
How important is it to have, really strong top-down leadership when it comes to implementing some of the cybersecurity awareness trainings and policies and procedures and things that help secure a company?
So I've coined a term, we all have heard ROI, right? Return on investment. Mm-hmm. And I've coined a term, and I call it RON, return on negligence. And what I mean by that is, listen, we all understand that, there are profit centers and you want to maximize the return on investment and things like that. But what if you're negligent and, something happens, that potentially could put you out of business. That could cost you a lot of money. That could cost you your reputation, and so on. And so when you ask that question, I always say, well, let's be careful. Let's talk about, RON, return on negligence. What is that? So I think what it is it is a, you want to be in an environment where you don't just talk about that, but you implement that. Again, there's a lot of talk about this, and, some of it appears to be common sense and things like that. And depending on the company's size, right? Do you have a CTO? Do you not? And different things like that. Excuse me. That really comes into play, but really it's that culture of actually implementing this, not necessarily talking about that, and mm-hmm. Not just for meeting compliance purposes, right? Saying, oh yeah, hey, we meet the compliance, that's great, but are you actually doing these things internally? And so again, going back, what we work, we work with small and mid-sized businesses, right? So we're not working with the large mid-market or enterprise companies with 10,000 employees and so on, right? That's not our market, and that's okay. We work with most places where maybe there isn't an IT team or there's a small IT team, and so we supplement that. We work with them side by side pretty well.
Do you, it reminds me of a story. I used to work for a company many years ago that, although they had a pretty strong IT presence, and they had complex passwords and multi-factor authentication, it was turned on for everybody except for the CEO. The CEO actually was in his own GPO. So he had his own GPO that allowed him to, not change his password. It never reset. It wasn't complex. And I'm like, you are the biggest target. Like, what are you doing? But I guess that happens probably more frequently than I would like to know. That's
great. Well, to your story, and I don't want to say this, but I don't want to say the name of the company, but it was pretty funny. Every time their website was down, right, the default message was, "Hey, thank you for your patience. We're upgrading the website," right? And it was just it was too funny. There was no upgrading going on. It was just down, So.
Yeah, that it's weird how, well, I guess it's not weird. It's just interesting how some people will have their exceptions and the way that they perceive things. So when you're taking on a new client and you're onboarding them, what kind of expectations are you setting when it comes to security? Because at the end of the day, they're going to come after you and be upset with you if they do have a breach, if they get hit with ransomware or something like that. But you also have to have their buy-in and their acceptance, and they're willing to go through the security awareness training and things like that in order to fully be protected. What is that onboarding like?
Yeah, well, funny that you asked that, because in the past we used to have two packages, right? One included advanced security, and one was just standard security. Mm-hmm. And since then, we've actually moved everything so that it only includes advanced security. It just wasn't worth it for us, right? We're like, the risk is too big. We're putting everybody on the advanced security package. Yeah. So what we do with our clients is we have a checklist. We have an onboarding team. We onboard new clients, but I think the way to do that is, within 90 days of working with them, we generally come back to them and we do what's called a strategic technology review. You can think of it as a strategic technology plan. And in there, we flag things as green, orange, or red, right? Green, you're good. Orange, let's talk about that. We probably want to do something, later in the year. Red, we probably want to do something about that sooner rather than later. And we summarize everything for them in 2 pages so that we can give it to a non-technical person, and they can wrap their head around that so that they know, hey, what's good, what's not, and we color code it, right? Just like a stoplight. And so we go through that checklist and we just kind of go over that and we share with them. So during the onboarding process, we're setting up a lot of these things, and we have a baseline, and then some of our clients want to tweak it so it's tighter, and others say no, we don't want that. But here's another, as we're talking, here's another really great feature that's part of your Microsoft subscription that we see a lot of people are not using, which is what I would call enterprise single sign-on, right? You're paying for it, you're just not using it. And it's really nice, a great way to maximize the security and productivity of all these different web-based applications. And I'll give you a simple example. You've got an employee, and most likely that employee has a separate username and password to get into Salesforce, to get into QuickBooks, to get into, whatever, right? Calendly, all these other web-based applications. With this enterprise single sign-on solution, it's really nice because you hire John. John goes in, there's a central dashboard, and in that dashboard, John can access all the web-based applications. It's tied better security into your main Microsoft account, but you can access all these other web-based applications from there. And then John no longer works there. I disable it in one place, and then John cannot go to salesforce.com and access that on his own. And so and again, this applies to Google and others, but that's something I just wanted to share with the listener that we see a lot of people not using.
So how can small and medium-sized businesses see if they are fully utilizing some of the Microsoft security products and making sure that their security is up to par?
Yeah, I think the big thing you want to do is you just want to have that honest discussion with your IT provider, whether it's internal or whether it's external, and say, hey, we're paying for this Microsoft subscription. Are we truly maximizing that? Okay.
Mhm.
The other thing, and this is a very objective number that you can get. You can actually go to Microsoft, and you can get what's called a security score from Microsoft, and it's really nice because you just log into Microsoft and you get that score, security.microsoft.com. So just go to, let me say it slower, security.microsoft.com, and Microsoft is going to give you an objective score. And it's a great way, and you need to be administrator to access that, right? So if you're just like an ordinary user, you may not be able to log in and access that. But what's really nice about that is, hey, you get a high score, fantastic. You can sleep better at night. You get a low score, you actually have, you can have that discussion with your managed service provider, with your internal IT department. You can say, hey, how could we maximize that score, and do it that way? So that's where I would start.
So yeah, that's a great resource. And I know going through that, they also like compare you with like other businesses that are of your demographics to see how you're doing with businesses that are like yours. So you can kind of see like, yeah, I'm where I should be, or, ooh, I'm not where I should be. I need to improve on that a little bit.
Exactly.
Have you seen like any uptick in, I don't know if it's either attacks and or maybe customers that are concerned with the things that have been going on with Russia and Ukraine, or from external threats and things like that? Or is it still like kind of business as usual?
Yeah, related to the Russia Ukraine, I haven't seen anything that's out of the ordinary. But again, we have a micro view of this, so we don't have a macro view, and I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary. I think the one thing that I want to emphasize that a lot of people don't realize is, hey, I'm a small business. People don't care about me, and you just sort of are humming along. Here's the big challenge with that. Don't think in those terms, because what people are doing, they're doing scans and they're looking for the weakest links that are out there. So they're looking for the low hanging fruit. You do not want to be the low hanging fruit, right? So even if you just don't take everything, even if you take just some of these things and you go ahead and you implement that, you're no longer the low hanging fruit, because that's where a lot of people are that's the easy target. When you read the news, you hear about the Target hack or the Home Depot, and these are the really big ones. You don't hear so much about the small company down the street or across town that had that, because it's embarrassing. They're trying not to advertise that. They're dealing with that. So my message for you is, don't be a sitting duck. Take some of these things, implement some of these things, so that you're not the low hanging fruit. Because believe me, if you don't think you're a target, you probably are. Because it's easier to get into your environment than it is, with a large enterprise.
So what if I'm a small business and I do get hit? I do get like, I come in Monday morning and I go to log on and I get this message covering my screen and says everybody in the office. What's step one? What do I do?
Yeah. So hopefully, so number one, we're trying to prevent this, right?
Right.
The second thing is, hopefully you've got some kind of a backup, where you can recover from a backup, and do that where it's completely separated. Because what we're seeing with the more advanced attacks is they're encrypting your primary server, and then they're encrypting the backup, so you can't recover from that, right? Because great, you encrypted my primary server. No problem. I'll just recover from backup and I'll be up and running, right? So they've got sophisticated enough, where they can go ahead and they can do that. So the really big thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you've got a backup in place, and then you can recover from backup. And then hire a professional. Look for outside help. I think we as engineers or as technical people, we're always trying to do things on our own. It's okay to ask for help. Don't be too prideful where you can't ask for help and get that help.
Right. So you talked about backups being encrypted, whenever you get hit. What kind of way can we help prevent that? Because some people say, well, you can definitely stop all attacks, and other people say, well, you can't stop them all. There's always a chance you can get hit. So how do you protect yourself from those backups being encrypted?
Yeah. So it's always a balancing act, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you're a small business with $5 million in revenue, the math doesn't make sense for you to have, a $5 million security solution, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just, I mean, so there, there's always that balancing act. Whereas if you're Microsoft, you can afford a lot more than 5 million for your security. There's that piece, but really the big thing, each environment is a little bit unique, but I'll tell you this: you want to have some redundancy on the server or on the environment that you have. You want to have an on-site backup, and then you want to have an off-site backup. And so what we do with our clients, even though let's say it's at the Microsoft data center, we're doing a backup within the same data center, and then we're doing another backup at an off-site or a different data center. And then the other thing that I strongly encourage people to do is twice a year, do a fire drill. Can you actually recover from that backup? John, I am amazed at how many companies don't have a fire drill where they test and say, hey, can I recover from backup or not? Right. If something does happen. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the things that I would encourage the listener to have in place. And again, I talk high level. I don't necessarily want to dive into the technical details and get into the weeds. I mean, I'm happy to do that, but I think we might overwhelm people. But twice a year, have that fire drill, and that's going to have a really big impact, and you're going to sleep much better at night knowing you have something in place.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've heard of people that said, "Oh, we have really good backups," but they've never actually tested them. You've never actually tried to recover. Being someone personally who's gone through that, many years ago, when we went through it, we had a routine of doing, semi-annual. So twice a year we would on the weekend, we would just fail everything over to our disaster recovery site and just run off that for the weekend, just to validate that, yes, we can go there and yes, we can come back. And knowing that whenever we got hit, it kept the stress level low. It kept so the mistakes that would come from being overwhelmed and stressed out were kind of not there as much because we had done this before. We've practiced this. We were ready to go. And just like with sports, and I know you coach your kids, my kids play sports, we have to constantly remind them that practice is how you play. So if you practice these things, you're going to be better off whenever the real crisis comes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's going back to, you don't want to be that sitting duck. You want to sleep better at night, knowing some of these things, you have some of these things in place. But the key point that I sometimes talk about that really resonates with people is who's auditing the auditor, right?
Mm.
So here's a typical scenario, in a real world scenario, John. Company, 30 employees, right? They're working, whether they have internal IT or using an outside IT provider. The CFO and the CEO don't necessarily understand IT in depth. But how do you know that IT provider is, providing the right security for your type of company, right? Who's auditing your IT company? You're just taking their word for them. So I'm going to share with the listener two tools that will really help. And here's the deal. It's really good for your IT provider, right? Where you can go in and say, hey, how are we doing on these things right here? And so we have a 29-point cybersecurity checklist. Again, that's riaworkspace.com/podcast. Mm-hmm. You go there and you can actually just download that in PDF right there. And it's a 29-point checklist. Give it to your IT person, say, hey, do we have these things in place? And if we do, great. And if we don't, let's add to that. And then I talked about this, the security.microsoft.com. Don't type in www, just do security.microsoft.com. Well, those are two really great tools that are fairly objective, that you can get a score and you can come back with, hey, this is, on a scale of 1 to 10, we're either at a 3 or a 9 or, whatever that number is. So I just wanted to share that with the listeners so that they have something tangible that they can actually do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to link those up in the show notes too, so they can get their cloud security score, their RIA cybersecurity essentials checklist, and we'll have all that in the show notes at geekleader.com. So, and also the secure.microsoft. So in case people, forget or is, they're riding in the car and they don't have trouble, just you can quickly go to geekleader.com and pull those links as well. So any final words of advice or thoughts or anything? And also don't forget, tell people how they can connect with you and find out more and maybe get some help from RIA WorkSpace to help them out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, so. So I'm an avid podcast listener. I listen to it in my car, and I listen to it when I'm running. And it's
Hmm.
not uncommon for me. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a good point, or this is a good website. I don't want to lose, miss it. So I actually pull over and stop and actually start typing that website, or I email it to myself, or I call myself. And I do the same thing when I'm running. I'll be running and I'm like, hang on, I don't want to miss this point. So I'll literally stop running and I'm sweating and my hands are wet and I'm trying to capture that. So yeah, putting them in the show notes goes a long way. So yeah, thanks, John, for doing that. Yeah, I just, we focus working a lot with small and mid-sized businesses. And, the really big thing is I think some people have a false sense of security and they know that. What's the one thing that keeps them up at night? That's sort of cybersecurity is a big one. And,
Hmm.
my message is you don't want to be you don't want to be a sitting duck for cyber criminals. And, we're on a mission to help businesses, and especially in the financial advisors, but, it spans different verticals so they can maximize their security, so they can maximize their IT compliance. And we just put some free tools that are out there. We've got some really good white papers, blogs, and content that people just can read and consume without having to exchange their email address and different things like that. So the two resources that I'll share with the listener where you can get more information about this is riaworkspace.com/podcast. So the checklists that I talk about are listed right there. And then if you just go to riaworkspace.com and you click on the Learning Center, we've got some really great content that you can leverage and you can use as it relates to cybersecurity. And again, even if it's not for you, you can give it to your internal IT team. You can give it to your, chief compliance officer, or you can give it to your external IT company, just, to help maximize your security. So those are probably the things that I would leave with the listener that are very beneficial.
Awesome. And again, those are linked up in the show notes at geekleader.com. And David, thanks so much for coming on the show and giving us a little bit of education and helping us out and enlightening us on some of the things that we need to be focusing on when it comes to cybersecurity.
Thank you, John.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some T-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.